Robby Plemmons. Welcome to the show.
Thanks for having me, Jim.
So Robby is the pastor at CrossPoint Presbyterian. It's a PCA church in Park City where we attend, and he's a longtime friend, and he's also into Bitcoin. Did you want to give us a little introduction about your background?
So came to faith as a freshman in college. I was in a Southern Baptist church, and the Lord was very kind to me there, and went off to school at a Southern Baptist college, Mississippi College. Shout out to the Choctaws. But I really wanted to kind of wrestle with what do I believe, and what does the Scripture teach about faith and practice. And so I went to Beeson Divinity School, moved to Beeson in Birmingham, Alabama, and started my graduate level studies there. Met my wife and spent a number of years in Birmingham before moving out here to Park City to start CrossPoint. Moved out here with my wife and my two kids, and we've been here ever since. And God's been good. It's been a long, slow journey, and we're very thankful for the privilege of serving here in Utah, which is kind of a lot of ways the wild, wild west still when it comes to Christian ministry. Kind of on the forefront of what the world is going to be like, kind of in a post-Christian culture where you are definitely a minority religious group, trying to make sense of diverse faith traditions, no faith traditions, very pagan kind of societies. So it's been kind of an interesting run, and seeing how God has brought us to this particular place, and then you factor in the Bitcoin aspect of everything. It's kind of fascinating to think about what the future might be.
Well, that's our thing at Magnalia, obviously, Bitcoin in the church. So what is your story with Bitcoin?
I think like most people, Bitcoin popped up on my radar a number of years ago, but I didn't really pay any attention to it. Probably didn't even know how to quantify it other than, just some magic internet money, let's say. And introduced, I guess, in a little bit more formal kind of way with a pastor who used to be here in Utah, and he was actually mining Bitcoin. And I thought, wow, that's interesting. But still had no idea what that even meant other than he was running these little computers in his office. I think that moment when Bitcoin really kind of started to kind of creep into my global thought was probably around 2019, I think. We were back visiting with my wife's family, and Bitcoin was on a run, and it was on all the news channels and about how much Bitcoin had gone up that day, and I still was left with this sense that this is just a waste of money. Why would anybody want to take hard-earned dollars and buy Bitcoin? And I just didn't know what to think about it. And I had lots of questions about Bitcoin. But I had a member of our church who came and who was interested in giving in Bitcoin, but they wanted us to consider not liquidating the Bitcoin immediately, but holding on to it and seeing what might happen in terms of its value over the long term. And so that forced me to do, I wouldn't say a deep dive, but definitely start to look at this more thoroughly. What is it that we would be taking on? What exactly is Bitcoin? How does it work? So that I could then give hopefully a thoughtful answer about whether or not we would do that. And that just opened up a whole kind of Pandora's box about money, about the world that we live in, the governmental powers, the Federal Reserve, and I kind of landed on, I don't quite understand everything about Bitcoin. Really, I probably don't understand much about Bitcoin, but enough that it was intriguing me to consider it further about how it might play a part in the kingdom mission of establishing a church in Park City. And what we hope and have been praying for the entire time we're here is seeing more faithful gospel churches established, planted, and strengthened in the state of Utah, across the country, and around the world.
I think your story is pretty similar to a lot of people. Nobody ever really fully understands Bitcoin, right? How much time would you say that you've probably spent grappling with it or trying to understand it? And what was there like a particular book or video or sort of anything that made a breakthrough for you in terms of your understanding?
Yeah, so it'd be hard for me to quantify time because I spent a number of hours for several weeks, maybe months, listening to YouTube podcast on Bitcoin, kind of like an intro to Bitcoin or Bitcoin for Dummies kind of podcast. And then YouTube populates, oh, you like this? Well, we think this might be interesting. And so there was about a period of 2 months where I probably spent 7 or 8 hours a day. I was in a place place where I could listen to podcasts while I'm doing other things, listening to those, trying to understand cryptocurrency in a larger format, and then where does Bitcoin kind of find its place in the larger world of cryptocurrency. I think for me, the big question was I had these hesitations or the reluctance around digital currency or assets, and that's part of the question. Is I still am not 100% sure how to quantify Bitcoin. It's obviously a cryptocurrency. Some people refer to it as an asset, digital gold. It's technology. It's more comprehensive than what you imagine Bitcoin to be in the beginning, and so each kind of layer gets pulled back, and more questions would be answered. But a couple of big issues for me was related to what happens if all of the infrastructure with the internet and the electrical grid goes down. What do you do then? And the answer that was given to me that kind of made all the things fall into place is the problems Bitcoin was designed to solve are not those problems. You have bigger issues at that particular point, and that Bitcoin wasn't ever created to be the answer to those problems. And then there was a question on a podcast, and I can't remember who the podcaster was, but he was asking the question as he was interviewing his guests about Bitcoin in the future. He's like, do you think things are going to be more digital or less digital in the future? And as soon as I heard that question, it was like the light bulb went off. In the course of my lifetime, I've seen rotary dial phones, touch-tone phones, cell phones that came in a bag, cell phones that you could put in the pocket. Now we have mobile devices where we're sending digital telegraphs, text messages to one another. And it was like in that moment I understood we are increasingly at an ever more rapid rate to a digital society. Why would money and currency not follow suit? And we've already seen it in other kinds of things with, chip cards. Now I no longer even have to hand the card to the person that's checking me out at Walmart. I just simply hold it up to this machine. It creates some kind of digital signal that's received, and then that money is credited or debited to the specific kind of account. So Bitcoin all of a sudden became not necessarily the answer, but a possibility. And so that was where I kind of started my Bitcoin journey and imagining what life will be like in the future.
So you come from a non-technical background. Do you ever feel like you wish you knew more about Bitcoin, or like you need to know more about Bitcoin from a technical standpoint to trust it or to use it? Like, how do you view that?
To be honest, I don't think I could learn too much of the technical background of Bitcoin.
Does that bother you?
No. I don't know how.
Would it have bothered you in the beginning, and now, given what you've learned, like that's less of an important thing to you? Like, I'm trying to understand. A lot of people are just, I don't understand Bitcoin, so I can't invest in it or I can't use it.
I don't think so. I think there's so many things in my life that I do not understand, but I know and trust that they work. Like, I'm not exactly sure how electricity is generated at a power plant and transmitted over power lines and then directed to my house. I just simply know if I walk over to the wall, barring some power outage, I flip the switch, the light comes on. Bitcoin kind of, works the same way. I understood the banking system a little bit better because I worked as a teller in college and kind of during seminary, so I knew a little bit about that system, but I didn't understand in all of its complexities and comprehensive, grasp of SWIFT transfers and interbanking, relationships. And so they're just some things that I'm okay. I don't have to know, as long as I know that there are people who do understand that when the power goes out, that they need to climb this pole and switch out the transformer. Then I'm okay trusting in their knowledge, their expertise in terms of, how do I utilize this and in what ways does this impact my life?
I feel like a lot of times people are just more comfortable with those familiar things that they've been using all their lives, just turning the light switch on or going to the bank and going to the ATM and getting some money out. So they can hold Bitcoin to a different sort of standard. Like, we have to understand it. Like Warren Buffett famously says, if I don't understand it, I'm not going to invest in it, right? Yeah. And so they say, well, I'm not going to invest in Bitcoin because there's no way I can understand cryptography or the blockchain or things like that. Or even if it's not at a technical level, I can't understand economics or whatever, right? And so I think it's what I'm trying to get at is there's always a deeper level that anybody can get to in their level of understanding. But just because you're never going to get down to the deepest level in terms of the code or something like that, it doesn't necessarily rule out the entire asset, right? And so it's just a question of where are you coming from, how deep can you get to, and does it give you a level of certainty or a level of conviction that is enough for you to want to take it seriously? And I think a lot of people just don't even, it's like getting over the hump of even being willing to spend any time at all looking into it. And so I guess in your case, what you were saying was you had seen it a couple times, but then it wasn't really until somebody was trying to give money to the church that it kind of forced you to like take it seriously and look into it and understand what was going on, right? Is that kind of what?
Yeah, that was definitely the motivating factor, that it went from just kind of a passing fancy, something that I'd consider as it appeared on the news once every 4 years, as it was kind of ripping to all-time new highs, to okay, this is something that I have to understand at least at a level to be able to say, yes, we are willing to receive this. And because the donor's intention was that we hold on to it, we're very fortunate as a church to be in a position where we had that luxury. We didn't have to immediately liquidate it to, meet financial obligations or pay any bills. And so we had that as an option. And so because that was their original intention, we want to honor that. And so I had to understand, okay, well, what is it that we're saying we're doing, and what are the things we should expect, or what are the things that we have to know? Because I think you can make excuses for not knowing things as a way to avoid dealing with reality. But the world is changing, and it's not going to go back. It's just going to continue to progress into whatever the future is. And I don't know what that is, and I'm not sure if Bitcoin is going to be a big part of it. I personally am convinced that it is, but I can't with 100% certainty say to anyone, Bitcoin is the future, and if you're not a part of it, you're missing out. I would say do everything you can to understand it to the level you need to feel comfortable to make a decision. And there are two decisions. Yes, I want to embrace Bitcoin, or no, I don't. And both of those are legitimate responses, but to just simply continue in ignorance is, I think, from a Christian perspective, is especially as a pastor, would be to kind of shirk my responsibilities, to think about the world and the people in it and the role of money. We're never going to be able to escape from this aspect of life. So how do we do it in a way? How do we steward those resources that have been entrusted to us in a way that honors the people who have been generous and who have given, but also glorifies God, meets needs, supports ministry around the world, across differing economies, cultures, societies. And my experience as an American pastor is very different than the pastors that we support in other places around the world.
I think as time goes on and the number presumably continues to go up, more and more Bitcoiners are going to want to give in Bitcoin to their churches. And so the church can't be caught flat-footed. There needs to be a response. There needs to be a policy that's ready. And it takes a while. Even you said yourself, when you first started your journey, there was several months of kind of digging into it and starting with the video podcast and then probably eventually graduating to books and things that were longer form. I want to go back to something you said at the beginning with the church and maybe the challenges and opportunities that Bitcoin presents and then maybe opens up. Like, let's talk about CrossPoint specifically. You said that CrossPoint's not in a position where it has to take its donations to keep the lights on, but it's also in a pretty expensive area, right? And so, like, what is it about Bitcoin that's exciting to you? Like, what opportunities do you see in the future that Bitcoin could open up for the church that otherwise wouldn't be there?
I think initially the idea of kind of holding it as a appreciating asset was exciting. I got in at the right time, right before kind of crypto summer was about to kick off. And so in terms of everything kind of coming together, I was the right place at the right time. The number kept going up and to the right. And so everything just was always positive. So it was really easy to make this decision. Had it been a different time, crypto winter, let's say, when we're seeing...
Or even at the end of a blow-off top.
Yeah.
Where a lot of people are really excited. They get everything in and then it crashes.
Yeah. Yeah, if it had been at a time where we're talking about a 30% correction, then I'm looking at it going, oh, this is very unwise. This is foolish. I think another
Would you feel that way now?
No, not at all. But then I think this next statement might help you understand. I thought of Bitcoin in terms of risk. It's a risky asset. And I can't remember if it was said to me, if it was in a podcast that I heard, or if it was in a book that I read. Bitcoin is volatile, not risky. Those are different things, but I think we use those interchangeably and think of those things synonymously because we see I think today, Bitcoin is up 10%, which is a pretty significant amount, and tomorrow it could be down 10%. But if you look at Bitcoin from its inception, it is only appreciated in value if you take a long enough time horizon. And so that's what helped me in coming to Utah and experiencing a lot of the challenges. For 12 years, we just faithfully labored with about 20 people kind of on average in Sunday attendance. But shortly after arriving on the scene in Utah, my wife and I realized we're not church planters. We have a different mindset that we're going to have to adopt if we're going to be able to make it here long term, and that is we're missionaries. And we're building something not for our lifetime, but for generations, hopefully. And so I started thinking in terms of 150 years. For everything that we really kind of consider and thought about, it was like, okay, does this lead to a successful church faithfully proclaiming the Word of God, praying for God's people, administering the sacraments week in and week out, discipling men and women and boys and girls in 150 years? If it does, then we should consider it. If it doesn't, we don't need to be focused on it. So that gave me a wider perspective than I think most people are thinking about. I mean, it's even hard to think about a single lifetime, but now we're talking about multiple generations. And when you adopt that time horizon, any single day or any single cycle is really not that important, or it shouldn't be that important. Is it still hard to see the numbers go down? Yeah, absolutely. Is it exciting to see the numbers go up? Yes, very much so. But I'm thinking in terms of decades on the shortest kind of time horizon and centuries for the longer time horizon. So I think it makes it easier to look at it and to understand risk versus volatility.
So Bitcoin really lines up with that multi-generational mindset that you already had. Like you had that to begin with, and then Bitcoin kind of came along and it was like, oh, this really gels with how we're already thinking.
So I don't know. I could say I had it. All of these things kind of all happened in the same time. It was kind of like a whirlwind. There were just a number of things that I'd experienced that started me down this road of questioning what I understood to be reality in the world that I lived in, what could be trusted, what did I know? What was I confident in that was true? What did I not know? And how did that lack of knowledge affect my life? And once I started to kind of ask those questions, then Bitcoin and this longer time horizon, all of those things just kind of started to align and going towards the same kind of direction.
Yeah, that makes sense. What about things like buying a building or, some longer-term projects, not necessarily on the decades or centuries time scale, but maybe years or getting into a decade? Like, what are you excited about? Like, how do you see Bitcoin playing a role in that for the church?
Yeah, and this donor who approached us first to talk about it, that was their intentions. We do live in a resort community, so real estate is incredibly expensive. We are a nomadic church. We rent space on Sundays from a local school, and it's a great facility. But in terms of like long-range planning, it's hard to know because that could change 1 year to the next, or literally could change, from one month to the next, which is kind of what happened to us in our previous location. Was we just got an email, hey, we need to talk to you guys, and as much as they hated to do it, we had to find a new location, and the Lord provided, and we're in a great spot, and it's been really exciting to see the growth that we've experienced. But there is something about having a permanent facility that would be nice. I have strong opinions about church facilities and how they're utilized during the week. So ideally be like a multi-purpose facility where some other ministry or some other use is taking place during the week when the church is not occupying it. But the goal was this gift of Bitcoin was that it would appreciate to a place where that might be the start of a capital campaign and the church being able to acquire a building. And so, the hope and the prayer is that if we are able to continue to kind of hold this as like a treasury asset or a capital reserve, that if Bitcoin continues to grow at the rate that it has and on the trajectory it is, that we would be able to secure a facility at some point in the future, and then have kind of a permanent location as a church and a little bit more, stability in terms of how we can do ministry or the factors that impact the way that we do ministry.
I think as individuals, we're all feeling the squeeze of increasing real estate prices. A lot of people that bought maybe a couple of years ago might feel stuck because if they sold, where are they going to buy? Everything's, they've printed so many dollars in just the last couple of years that everything's twice as expensive as it was even just a few years ago. I don't think churches are any different, especially churches in urban areas. I know Park City is kind of an expensive resort area, but the reality is like a lot of urban centers across the country and other places in the world are just insanely expensive. And so it's really sad to see the church having to devote so many of its resources to just even paying rent, much less the dream of buying a building, right? And so that makes me hopeful, kind of a cathedral building mindset. Not that the buildings have to be these ornate things like the Catholic Church used to build, but I do feel like we've lost something. Yeah. The church used to be able to take on projects like that could last for centuries, and they're relatively well-funded. But it's hard, especially in our day and age with the dollar and fiat constantly just siphoning all of our wealth away. The church is no different. So
the cool thing, though, is the resources at God's disposal are the same they've always been. And so none of the things that caught me by surprise, none of the realities of the world that I was living in that I had previously ignored and now I just kind of was discovering, God was completely and totally aware of those. And He is more than powerful enough to raise up governments, to bring governments down, to establish new currencies, to create new technologies in order to accomplish His purposes. We've seen Him do that throughout history. The people in those particular moments didn't always understand or couldn't connect the dots of what God was doing, but God was still active in order to draw men and women to Himself, to see the gospel go forward to the four corners of the earth, and people groups who have previously been unreached were now leveraging technology in ways that my grandparents could never have imagined in order to see the kingdom established in remote places or places that no one was even thinking about 150, 200 years ago. And so it's really exciting to hear these kinds of discussions and conversations taking place more so than I'd ever heard them in my life, about this idea of building strong families that build strong churches that then impact societies, and as societies grow and get stronger, impact nations, and hopefully have a long-term positive impact for the kingdom and for the glory of Jesus' name across the world and throughout history. And that's the wonderful thing, is what we're doing is some of the decisions that we're trying to make at a local church level. We may never even see the full extent of the decisions that were made to give Bitcoin in 2025, that, we may not see the full extent of that until 100 years from now. And people are like, man, I'm so thankful for ancestors who had the foresight to make these decisions when they did. And again, I'm a pro Bitcoin guy. Personally own Bitcoin. Our church holds Bitcoin. That was the place that we arrived at. I'm not saying that every single person is going to draw those same conclusions, but for me, it is becoming a strategic part about how I think about everything almost. There's something freeing about having a finite supply of something and knowing that this thing you're dealing with is not going to change or adapt or shift because of prevailing political winds or changes, across society. And I don't think you can think in 150-year time frames with fiat currency. It's just has not been borne out in the course of my lifetime.
Do you think there's a risk or a danger in the church for people to just completely write off Bitcoin, maybe because it's worldly, or we're not supposed to think about wealth, or we just need to give our wealth away? Like, what are the risks or dangers that you see there?
I think the biggest danger is kind of what we touched on earlier. It's this lack of imagination of what the world is possibly going to be. None of us can predict the future, but we do see things, and we see the changes that are happening at a breakneck pace. And so the tendency is to sit back and to think, well, whenever I understand this better, or whenever things are clearer, then I'll make a decision one way or the other. And I don't know that we have that luxury. I think as a pastor, I need to be thinking about stewardship principles from a biblical standpoint, and then taking these individual components of Bitcoin, of fiat dollars, of individual stocks that people own, and helping them to think through. Okay, these are the resources. These aren't the only resources. God's given you an incredible amount of resources, time, gifts, abilities, but we need to be thinking on a kind of comprehensive scale, how do all of these things fit into what God has called me to do individually? But individually, I'm a part of a corporate work that God is doing. And how do we dispense those or dispatch those resources according to what we sense that God's leading us to do, and the places that we have an affinity for? Some of us have strong connections to various places in the world. We family have descended. We descended from places like Scotland, where my family comes from. Then it was post-Christian culture. I have this burden to see, kind of like John Knox for Utah. Give me Utah or I'll die. John Knox had that same burden for Scotland, but I also have a burden for Scotland, and thinking in terms of, okay, if we can establish stewardship practices that would enable us to kind of reclaim areas of the world that have been lost to secular culture and to humanism and just a whole host of other things. I think we've got to be far more intentional. I think we've enjoyed so much, and I hate to say even peace and prosperity, but comfort and convenience in America, that if you have never traveled outside the United States, you have no idea what it's like to live in another country. You don't understand the struggles of living in various types of governments, and from the local level, and the corruption that sometimes occurs in these places, all the way up to the national level, the way that currency is manipulated in various places around the world, and the impact that has on people who are trying to survive and just make ends meet, food on their table. We've lived in a time where these factors have largely been isolated from us, and we've been insulated from these kind of issues. So we've got to think through a rapidly changing world. The world's getting smaller, but in some ways it's getting bigger too. Global population is, 7-8 billion. Resources, we're told, are limited and scarce. And so there's this sense that it'd be real easy to retreat into fear and say, well, I've got to secure these things for me and for my family, and not think about the impact we're having globally, but also in these larger time horizons.
So for the church leader that's sort of already made up their mind about Bitcoin or written Bitcoin off, is there anything that you would say to encourage them, or any advice that you would give them about Bitcoin?
I think I would say be curious. Clearly, there are brilliant people who have been convinced Bitcoin being something that is a valuable tool, resource, asset. And again, that's, there's lots of questions about what Bitcoin really is. Just be curious, ask questions, hear stories, and then ask the Lord to give you a humble heart to be able to view the world differently than what you may currently view it. And that is part of Bitcoin forces you to look at the world through a new set of eyes. And that's not an easy process because the world that I grew up in, it was very clearly defined. The USA are the good guys, and Rocky, it was Russia is bad. But as I've gotten older, I'm hopefully wiser, as I've experienced more traveling in different continents throughout the world, I've come to realize that everything is not as clearly defined in black and white as I was led to believe, or maybe I just naively believed, and it was just my own choice to kind of view and see the world that way because it made it easier on me. But now, I'm looking at everything kind of through this lens and questioning what I'm told on the media, what I read in the, publications, even what other people who I trust and would have trusted in the past, their opinions I now view kind of skeptically. And so there's just a lot of uncertainty in the world. And one of the things about Bitcoin that was most attractive to me was this idea of a fixed amount, and that it was not going to change. 21 million today, 21 million tomorrow, 21 million at whatever particular point you want to, draw the line out the front. That hasn't been the case with most everything else in our lives. Things, experts told us, 50 years ago, 9 out of 10 doctors recommended Camel cigarettes or whatever the number is. Well, now no one can smoke cigarettes at all because it's, highly toxic and incredibly dangerous. And I don't know if that's I don't think it's a bug. I think it's the feature of contemporary society where you can't trust anything or anyone. And from a biblical standpoint, we know that reality is ultimately grounded in the person of who God is, the eternal triune Father, Son, and Holy Spirit. And so being able to come back to something that's concrete and that's solid and immovable is a great comfort. It does challenge you in a lot of ways too, is because you can't make reality be whatever you want it to be or imagine it to be. Reality is what it is, and we have to learn to live within those parameters, constraints, truths. And so that was one of the things I would encourage you to do is be open to the idea that the world is not exactly the way you've understood it to be.
It's tough, right? Because the talking heads on the TV that have all the letters after their name, and they're the experts, will tell us things like 2% inflation is good for you. And maybe in some narrow sense, in sort of a half-truth, they're correct. But it's not really the whole picture. Having said that, Bitcoin's not the savior, like you said. Bitcoin's also not perfect. Is there anything that keeps you up at night about Bitcoin?
So there are a couple of things that keep me up at night about Bitcoin. I will speak personally, and then I'm going to speak at a systematic level. Personally, it scares me how easily my heart was drawn to Bitcoin, just like it would be to any other resource that I'm putting my hope and my trust in. When, like I said, I came at the right time. I got in at the start of kind of like crypto spring where things were starting to recover, and I've gotten to see some really exciting, 2, 3, 5 day periods where it's almost doubled in price, and it's reached all-time new highs just in the last month and a half. It's corrected a little bit, but like I said, today I think, when I last checked, it was at, almost 100,000, way more than I would have imagined when I first, invested in it. But I do feel the tug or the battle that goes on inside my own heart in my own kind of spiritual transformation, that these are resources. These are things that I have responsibility to steward. They're not treasures to hold on to. And so that at any moment, if Jesus were to call me to give those away, to liquidate them, and to transfer, fiat dollars to something else, I have to be willing to follow Jesus. That He is my true treasure. And I think of the encounter that Jesus has with the rich young ruler, and he comes and he asks the question, what must I do to be saved? And the ultimate challenge, because Jesus is speaking to where his identity is you just have to sell everything and give it away and come follow me. Now, he doesn't tell that to Nicodemus when Nicodemus is coming to ask about the kingdom, because Nicodemus's identity was in somewhere else. And so he says to him, he's like, you're really trusting in the fact that you're a descendant of Abraham. You got to be born again. That life is not where kingdom life is. And this guy was looking at what he had done, all that he had acquired, and Jesus says, that's not where it's at. And I want to be the kind of person that would be faithful with little things so that God could trust me with big things. And it's a journey. And so that keeps me up at night. That's just a personal fear that I have for myself.
Like it becoming an idol?
Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah.
If this thing, let's just say, this thing, takes off like a rocket ship over the next 12 months, I would have the ability to do things I've never had in my entire life. And I don't know that I have the character required at this particular moment to be able to resist the temptations to do things that I could never do before. But I'm growing in God's grace, and I'm trusting that His work in my life will keep pace with whatever the rate of Bitcoin's increase is, and so that I will be thankful and be able to bless God, but also hold that stuff loosely and say, this isn't mine. It was never mine. You have blessed me with it, and so that I might in turn be a blessing to other people, and so that I might utilize these resources in ways that would bring glory to your name and that would further advance the work of the kingdom. So that's my personal fear. The other one is the involvement of large market makers, financial institutions like BlackRock and countless other ones. I just don't know what the end game is for them. We have differing outcomes for the future. I'm 100% convinced, and that scares me. All of a sudden, large players who were anti-cryptocurrency, specifically Bitcoin in general, in specific, speaking out against it, are now some of the largest buyers of ETFs and Bitcoin holders, and it's like, how will they impact Bitcoin, how it's utilized, how it's deployed, how it's accounted for in the future? And so that keeps me up at night.
So you think power players can take over or control Bitcoin?
I don't understand technically Bitcoin enough to know if they can or can't, but I don't put anything past people who have vested interest in maintaining power and control doing anything in order to make sure that doesn't escape their grasp.
This isn't enough for you to not put money in Bitcoin.
No, not at all. Not at all. Because here's the thing. Everything is kind of an evaluation of risk reward, and all of these same factors, whether it's fiat dollars, whether it's an investment in the stock market, all of those things have a similar kind of risk profiles. I'm from Mississippi. I'm just a redneck who wound up in one of the most incredible places, blessed by God to do ministry in His name. I don't understand all of these things, but I do know that what we see is not always the reality of what's going on, and that there is manipulation that takes place behind the scenes. I don't quite always understand how that's happening, but it does happen. And we have people on television admitting to those things. If they want to see the price go up, then they have investment options available to them to do that. Or if they want to see the price go down, they have a way to to kind of play the opposite side and see the price affected that way. And so I don't want to be naive. I want to be, what is it Jesus says, be shrewd as serpents and gentle as doves. That's the way I want to be. I want to know the world that I live in, and I want to live with great hope and great confidence because I believe God is sovereign. So none of these people are beyond His control or His ability to work in and through. But I don't want to be, naive and be like, oh, well, because they said that Bitcoin could never be influenced, that it could never be influenced. I don't know that for sure. So live with a little bit of kind of healthy skepticism, even of Bitcoin.
Yeah, you have to stay humble.
Yeah.
Stack sats. I guess by comparison, the dollar or traditional finance banking systems, the Federal Reserve, these things keep you up more at night? Like if you thought about putting your money over here versus over here?
So I don't know that it would keep me up any more or less. I just have a lot more questions. I think in all honesty, like most people, when I imagined the Federal Reserve, I imagined it was a government entity. And so when I kind of discovered that the Federal Reserve is a private bank and had never been audited and they're in control of these huge aspects of our financial system, I started to kind of look at everything, with a question like, okay, who benefits from this, and what is the benefit of keeping me in this situation or keeping me ignorant of these details? And so I think I just, with all of these things, I just hold everything kind of humbly, like you said. I think that's a big, important part for Christian people, to be humble, not to assume that we understand or know everything, and just try to walk by faith and be wise, be discerning, and make decisions in light of how we've come to understand the reality of our country, our economy. It's a lot to try to process for a finite human being. I mean, they're just things I can't know. And so I just want to try to focus on the most important things that I can, and then be found faithful, hopefully, with the way I conduct myself in light of God's truth about these things.
As Westerners in a developed country, sometimes it's hard for us to really comprehend the need for something like Bitcoin. What are you excited about in terms of Bitcoin and the rest of the world, especially in developing countries?
Yeah, I think one of the things I'm excited about is the ability to get resources into places where they're needed, but there have maybe been traditional roadblocks. Just in our personal experience, we support a missionary in another part of the world, and over the course of our partnership, we've seen the kind of governmental regime change make things increasingly more difficult, so much so that we would try to send money and wires would be denied and rejected, and it wasn't always clear on what grounds that was happening, because one time it would go through, the next time it might be returned. And so it was kind of always a head scratcher, like exactly what is the right way to go about this. And with Bitcoin, it removes that middleman. There's no need to trust a kind of a third-party intermediary. We could just deploy those resources directly to the ministry, to the church, to the people who are in need, and it makes it a lot easier in terms of getting them there, and I think it probably is a lot quicker in terms of resources being transferred from one wallet to another. It can be done in minutes, at most hours, let's say, where we're sometimes looking at several days between funds going out and then funds being received. And then in between, there's this question about, like, is it going to go through this time or is it going to get bounced back? So I think I'm excited about that. Hopefully, too, that the Christians have a stronger connection to what our brothers and sisters experience in other parts of the world, where they don't have the luxury of going to a bank Monday through Friday and half the day on Saturday at any particular point, or pulling up to an ATM in order to get cash out after hours. For some of them, it requires a lot of intentional planning, and some of the times they might go to the bank and the resources that they were counting on being there aren't going to be there. If you have a self-custody of your Bitcoin, it in some ways prevents governments from, taking those and seizing those assets, like we've seen in other places and not so distant past, where all of a sudden an order is passed or an edict is issued, and 45% of your total assets now are co-opted for the government, because we all have to do our part and pay our share. And I think being able to protect Christians in that way and kind of have a better understanding of the challenges that none of us really have to face gives us a a deeper connection and maybe a burden to alleviate a lot of the suffering that's taking place in the world that we are immune to.
Yeah, I don't know if I'd say immune, but it's a lot less apparent. People who live in developing countries a lot of times will be living through hyperinflation. They're seeing the value of their local currency go down 50% in a couple of months. And when you measure everything relative to the dollar, we've got it pretty good. In fact, a lot of people around the world want to put their money in dollars, even though dollars are also inflating. It's just the least worst fiat currency. So that doesn't make it any less right, though. Or any less wrong. Like the inflation is still wrong, even if it's happening in slow motion in our country. So yeah, I tend to be hopeful. I typically view Bitcoin as a more just economic system, or at least it promotes more justice in the world and more equity, which I think are things that as Christians we can all get behind. That's what excites me. Is there anything else that excites you, thinking about just Bitcoin, the future of the church and the world and ministry and the kingdom?
Yeah, I think it gives me hope. I think I'm excited for maybe some of the bumps along the road that kind of startle God's people awake as people begin to realize, we have lived through, this time period where as Americans we've experienced all the strengths of the American dollar and we've been the beneficiaries of a lot of the suffering of people around the world. And so it's going to be hard. I think facing reality sometimes is, but it's always, at least in the Christian perspective, the path to experiencing God's grace and mercy as these things, kind of are brought into the light and we start to understand maybe the ways that these things have had a hold on us that we didn't fully comprehend, a year ago or 5 years ago. So I'm excited about what the future could be. Again, is Bitcoin the savior? No. Is Bitcoin a tool that could be used? Absolutely, and I hope that it is utilized to bring a more just society, to alleviate suffering in the world, not just for Christians, but for all people, and that God's people especially would be really generous because they have this confidence that God will supply all our needs through His glorious riches in Christ Jesus, and that our treasures really aren't Bitcoin. It's not how many sats we have in our cold wallet. Our treasure is Jesus, that God has come in the person of Jesus, and He's made available to us this reality of life that whether we have a lot or whether we have a little, we can be content, as the Apostle Paul says. Not only can we be content, but we can experience joy in the seasons of little, and we can experience joy in the seasons of plenty, and that we have this vision of a kingdom life well-lived for God's glory that brings blessing to every single person that we come in contact.
Amen.
Amen.
Well, we can leave it at that. That was a great ending. Thanks for coming on the show.
Thanks, Jim.